I funded my sister's entire wedding, but my stepmother barred me from every photo, claiming they were family only. I left quietly, but when I canceled the honeymoon and listed their house for sale, silence turned into screaming. They forgot who signed the checks. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The betrayal didn't happen with a scream or a slap. It didn't happen in a lawyer's office or during a heated argument over a dinner table. It happened in the soft, golden light of a setting sun, amidst the scent of 3,000 white hydrangeas I had personally sourced and arranged. It happened while a string quartet, which I had paid for, played Pachelbel's Canon in D in the background. It happened in complete silence, at least on my end. I was standing near the trellis, the one I had spent 3 weekends designing to ensure it would hold the weight of the climbing roses Lacey wanted. My feet were throbbing in heels I had bought specifically to match the bridesmaid's color palette, a soft, dusty rose that Judith had insisted upon. I wasn't a bridesmaid, of course. Judith had told me months ago that having me in the bridal party would throw off the aesthetic because I was 10 years older than Lacey and her friends. "We want the photos to look cohesive, Lucy," Judith had said, patting my hand with that condescending softness she had perfected over 2 decades. "You understand, don't you? You're better behind the scenes anyway. That's where you shine." I had swallowed that hurt, just like I had swallowed every other slight since my father died. I convinced myself that it was fine, that being the maid of honor in spirit. A title they gave me to placate me while asking for my credit card was enough. I told myself that today was about Lacey. It was her day. My job was to make it perfect. And it was perfect. The venue, a sprawling garden estate that usually cost $50,000 to rent, had been secured for a fraction of the price because of my professional connections as an interior designer. The lighting, the floral arrangements, the custom-built archway, it was all my work. I had barely slept in 3 days, ensuring every petal was perfect, every chair sash tied at the exact same angle. I watched Lacey standing in the center of the lawn, looking radiant in the Vera Wang gown I had purchased for her. Judith was next to her, beaming, wearing a silver dress that cost more than my first car. They looked like royalty. And I stood there, clutching my clutch bag, waiting. I was waiting for my name. The photographer, a man named Marcus whom Judith had handpicked, and I had paid, was organizing the formal portraits. He had a loud, booming voice that carried over the gentle chatter of the guests. "Okay, let's get the parents. Mother of the bride, come on in." Judith swept in, striking a pose. "Beautiful, now siblings, let's get the siblings." My heart lifted slightly. This was it. I took a step forward, smoothing the silk of my dress, ready to join the sister I had practically raised. I prepared my smile, the one that said I was proud, that I was happy, that all the money and the sleepless nights were worth it. Marcus looked up from his viewfinder. He looked directly at me, then his eyes darted to Judith. A subtle, almost imperceptible nod passed between them. "Actually," Marcus said, his voice bright and fake, "let's do just the biological family for this one, just the core unit. We want a really tight shot." I froze. My foot hovered mid-step before I slowly placed it back on the grass. Biological family. The words hung in the air, heavier than the humidity. Lacey didn't look at me. She was too busy fixing her veil, checking her reflection in the lens. Judith, however, looked right at me. She offered a small, tight smile, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that said stay back. I retreated to the edge of the carpet. "It's just one shot," I told myself. "They want a shot with just the two of them. That's normal. I'll be in the next one." But I wasn't. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 40. "Okay, let's get the cousins. Let's get the college friends. Let's get the neighbors from the old street." Groups of people swarmed in and out of the frame. I stood by the trellis, a statue in a garden I had built. I watched as distant relatives, people Lacey hadn't spoken to in 5 years, were beckoned in with enthusiasm. I watched as Judith's yoga instructor was pulled in for a fun group shot. Every time I tried to catch Marcus's eye, he looked away. Every time I took a tentative step toward the group during a lull, Judith would suddenly bark a new order. "Oh, we need one with just the boys. Now one with the bridesmaids and the flower girls." I stood there until the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, cold shadows across the lawn. The realization didn't hit me all at once. It seeped in slowly, like ice water soaking into fabric. I checked my watch. It had been an hour and 15 minutes of formal photos. I hadn't been in a single one. Not one. The sister of the bride, the primary financier of the event. The woman who had wiped Lacey's tears when her first engagement failed, who had paid for Judith's hip surgery, who had kept the roof over their heads. I was being erased. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a notification from my bank. Transaction alert, $4,500, final catering payment. I looked at the screen, then back at the happy group laughing in front of the camera. Judith was holding a glass of champagne, her head thrown back in performative joy. Lacey was glowing, the center of a universe I had paid for but wasn't allowed to inhabit. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. It was the diagnosis of a terminal rot in our relationship that I had been too blind to see until this very moment. My first instinct was to cry. I felt that familiar sting behind my eyes, the tightening of my throat that usually preceded a breakdown. I wanted to march over there and demand to be included. I wanted to scream, "I paid for that dress. I paid for this photographer. I paid for the food you're about to eat." But as I watched Judith maneuver her way into yet another shot, this time pushing the groom aside so she could be center stage with Lacey, something inside me shifted. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. It was a physical sensation, like a fever breaking. My pulse, which had been racing with anxiety, slowed down. My hands stopped trembling. I looked at them, really looked at them, and saw them for what they were. They weren't family. They were parasites, and I was the host. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the expensive jasmine vines I had special ordered from a nursery in Charleston. They smelled sweet, cloying, almost sickening now. I turned away from the photo shoot. No one noticed. Judith was too busy directing the groom's parents on where to stand, treating them like props in her personal pageant. Lacey was checking her makeup in a compact mirror held by a bridesmaid. I walked toward the side of the venue, past the beautifully set tables where 200 guests would soon be seated for a dinner that cost more than most people made in a year. I saw my place card at the head table. Lucy, sister of the bride. I reached out, picked up the card, and slipped it into my purse. It was the only souvenir I would take from this night. I kept walking. I bypassed the main entrance where the guest book was waiting to be signed. I bypassed the gift table, where a stack of envelopes sat next to the crystal vase I had bought them. I walked straight to the side gate, the service entrance used by the caterers. A waiter I had coordinated with earlier, a young man named David, saw me. He looked confused. "Ms. Lucy, are you okay? The reception is about to start. They're going to announce the wedding party soon." I stopped and looked at him. He was a nice kid. He had been helpful during the setup, unlike my own family. "I'm leaving David," I said, my voice steady, surprisingly calm. "Leaving, but aren't you giving a speech?" I had written a speech. 3 pages of heartfelt memories, funny anecdotes, and wishes for the future. I had practiced it in front of my mirror for weeks, timing the pauses to make sure I didn't cry too much. "No," I said, a small, dark smile touching my lips. "I don't think they'll have time for my speech. They have too many photos to take." "Is there? Should I tell someone?" he asked, looking concerned. "No, don't tell anyone. Let them figure it out." I pushed open the iron gate. The heavy metal clicked shut behind me with a finality that felt like a gavel banging down in a courtroom. I walked to my car, a sensible sedan parked in the overflow lot, because Judith had insisted the VIP spots. near the front be reserved for the groom's family and her close friends. I sat in the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel. The silence of the car was a relief after the forced cheerfulness of the string quartet. I looked at the venue one last time through the windshield. It looked magical, a glowing oasis of wealth and happiness. It was a lie, a beautiful, expensive lie. I started the engine. As I pulled away, my phone buzzed again, a text from Judith. "Where are you? We need you to hold Lacey's train while we do the walking shots. Hurry up." I didn't reply. I didn't even feel the urge to explain. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully relegated me to the role of the silent servant, the bank account with a pulse. They thought they could extract everything I had to give and leave me standing in the shadows, grateful for the scraps of their attention. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten that the shadows were where the power was. They had forgotten that while they were posing in the light, I was the one holding the switch. And I was about to turn it off. To understand why I didn't turn the car around, you have to understand the last 10 years of my life. You have to understand the ecosystem of guilt and obligation that Judith had cultivated since the day my father died. I was 24 when Dad passed away from a sudden heart attack. Judith was his second wife, a woman he had married when I was 18. She was beautiful, charming, and utterly helpless when it came to practicalities, or so she claimed. "I just don't understand these forms, Lucy," she would weep, sliding a stack of bills across the kitchen table a week after the funeral. "Your father always handled this. I'm too grief-stricken to think about money." So I handled it. I was fresh out of design school, working 60-hour weeks as a junior associate, but I took over. I managed the estate. I paid the bills. I navigated the probate process. Dad had been comfortable but not wealthy enough to support Judith's lifestyle indefinitely. He left the house, a beautiful, historic Victorian that had been in our family for 3 generations, in a trust. The terms were simple. Judith could live there for her lifetime or until she remarried, but the ownership resided with me. I was the trustee. I was the one who paid the property taxes, the insurance, the maintenance costs. Judith, in her grief and later in her entitlement, seemed to forget the trust part. In her mind, it was her house, her domain. I was just the daughter who visited, the one who fixed the roof when it leaked and replaced the boiler when it broke. And then there was Lacey, my half-sister. She was 14 when Dad died. She was the baby, the princess. Judith raised her to be decorative. While I was pulling all-nighters, drafting blueprints, and managing contractors to build my own firm, Lacey was taking tennis lessons and finding herself. By the time Lacey was 24, she had found herself as a lifestyle influencer. In reality, this meant she posted photos of lattes and outfits that I paid for. "It's an investment, Lucy," Judith would argue when I questioned why Lacey needed a $2,000 camera or a trip to Chelum. "She's building a brand. You have to spend money to make money. You of all people should know that." I gave in. I always gave in. Why? Because they were all I had. My mother had died when I was young. Dad was gone. Judith and Lacey were the only tethers I had left to a sense of family. I bought their love because I was terrified that if I stopped paying, they would disappear. I didn't realize until the wedding that they had already disappeared. The family I thought I was supporting was a hallucination. Judith was the architect of this dynamic. She was a master of the backhanded compliment and the strategic exclusion. She was a woman who could make you feel grateful for an insult. "Oh, Lucy, you look so sturdy in that dress," she had said to me earlier that day while we were getting ready. "It's good. You're the rock. Lacey is the flower and you're the rock. We need you to be strong so she can shine." She was 58, but she looked 45 thanks to the treatments I funded. She had never held a job in the 12 years I had known her. Her profession was widow, and she played the role with Oscar-worthy commitment. But recently, her behavior had shifted from needy to predatory. She had started asking about the trust documents. She had made comments about downsizing me, asking why I needed my own apartment in the city when I could just stay in the guest room at the big house whenever I visited. "It's silly for you to pay rent when we have all this space," she had said last month. "Besides, if you moved in, you could help Lacey with her content. She needs a photographer." She didn't want a roommate, she wanted a live-in servant. And then there was the wedding. The budget had started at $30,000. It ballooned to $80,000. I covered the difference. I covered the deposits. I covered the emergency charge when Lacey decided she hated the original flowers 2 weeks out. And finally, the honeymoon, the piece de resistance, 2 weeks in the Maldives, overwater bungalow, first-class flights, a $20,000 gift that I had presented to them at the rehearsal dinner. Lacey had squealed, Judith had cried, they had hugged me. "You're the best sister in the world," Lacey had screamed. "We couldn't do this without you, Lucy," Judith had sobbed. It was the validation I craved. It was the drug I was addicted to. But standing in that garden, watching them pose for photos while I was treated like hired help, the drug wore off. I saw the transaction for what it was. I wasn't buying love. I was paying a ransom. And I was done paying. As I drove down the highway, putting miles between me and the family-only photo shoot, my phone rang. It was Judith. I let it go to voicemail. Then Lacey called. I let it go to voicemail. Then Marcus, the photographer. Voicemail. I wasn't going home to cry. I wasn't going to my apartment to wallow. I drove straight to my office. It was Saturday night, and the building was empty. I unlocked the door, turned on the lights in my studio, and sat down at my desk. I pulled out the file marked Family Trust. I pulled out the file marked Lacey Wedding. I opened my laptop. They wanted a life without me in the picture. I was about to give them exactly what they asked for. The silence in my office was different from the silence in my car. It wasn't empty, it was heavy with potential. It was the silence of a demolition site right before the charges are blown. I laid the documents out on my drafting table, the deed to the house, the trust agreement, the wedding invoices, the honeymoon itinerary. I wasn't just an interior designer, I was a businesswoman. I ran a firm that managed million-dollar contracts. I knew how to read fine print, I knew how to find leverage. And looking at the papers in front of me, I realized I held all of it. The first thing I did was open the travel concierge portal. The Maldives trip was booked under my Platinum account. I saw the itinerary, Mr. and Mrs. Lacey and Todd Miller. Departure, Monday, 6:00 a.m. I hovered my mouse over the cancel booking button. It was non-refundable, meaning I wouldn't get the money back. $20,000 gone. A week ago, that thought would have made me nauseous. Now, it felt like the price of admission to my own freedom. It was a sunk cost, but denying them that trip, that was priceless. But I didn't click it yet. No, that would be too simple, too quick. I wanted them to feel the panic. I wanted them to be at the airport, bags packed, sunscreen applied, ready for paradise, only to be turned away at the gate. I moved on to the house. The trust documents were clear. The trustee, Lucy, shall have sole discretion over the maintenance, sale, and management of the property. Judith's right to live there was contingent on the property remaining in the trust. But there was a clause, Clause 14b, that my father had added at my insistence years ago, back when Judith had first shown signs of being fiscally irresponsible. Clause 14b. The trustee reserves the right to liquidate the asset if the maintenance costs exceed 10% of the trust's liquid value for 2 consecutive years. I pulled up the spreadsheets. Judith hadn't paid a dime toward the house in 8 years. I had paid everything. Taxes, repairs, insurance. Technically, the trust hadn't paid it. I had paid it into the trust, which then paid the bills. I did the math. The maintenance costs borne by the trust were effectively zero because I was subsidizing them. But if I stopped, if I sent a bill to the trust for the last 5 years of property management services and capital improvements, which I was legally entitled to do as the professional who managed the renovations. The trust would be insolvent, and an insolvent trust must liquidate its assets to pay its debts. I could sell the house. I didn't just have the power to kick them out. I had the power to sell the roof over their heads and keep the proceeds to reimburse myself for years of financial abuse. My phone was still buzzing. I glanced at it. 17 missed calls. Then a text from Lacey. "Where the hell are you? People are asking. Mom is freaking out. You have the checks for the vendors." I stared at the screen. That was it. That was the only reason they cared. The vendor checks. I had the checkbook in my purse. The final payments for the DJ, the photographer Marcus, and the venue staff were due tonight at the end of the event. If I didn't pay them, Judith, who had signed the contracts as the host to look important, would be personally liable. I typed a reply. "I'm not coming back. You wanted just family. You got it. Handle the vendors yourself." I hit send. Then I turned my phone off. I spent the next 3 hours drafting a legal notice. I wasn't just going to ghost them. I was going to serve them. I drafted a notice to vacate for Judith, citing the upcoming liquidation of the trust asset. I drafted a termination of financial support letter. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't guilt. It was adrenaline. For the first time in my life, I wasn't designing a space for someone else to live in. I was designing my own life. Sunday morning broke with a hangover headache, even though I hadn't touched a drop of alcohol. I had slept on the sofa in my office. I turned my phone on at 8:00 a.m. The notifications flooded in like a tidal wave. 53 missed calls, over 100 texts, voicemails that filled the entire inbox. I scrolled through them. They followed a predictable trajectory: confusion, "Lucy, where are you?" Anger. "This is so selfish. You're ruining Lacey's night." Panic. "The DJ is threatening to leave. We need the check." Bargaining. "Just come back and we can talk, please." Vitriol. "You jealous bitch. I hope you're happy." That one was from Judith. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I drove to my apartment, showered, and put on my sharpest business suit. I wasn't going to a brunch. I was going to war. I knew where they would be. They would be at the house, hosting the post-wedding gift opening brunch, another event I was supposed to have organized. I arrived at the house at 11:00 a.m. The driveway was full of cars. I parked on the street and walked up the path I had repaved 2 years ago. I unlocked the front door with my key. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses drifted from the sunroom. I walked in. The room went silent. Lacey was sitting on a mountain of torn wrapping paper, wearing a white sundress. Judith was holding a mimosa, holding court with a group of aunts. "Lucy," Judith's voice was a mixture of relief and fury. She stood up, her face flushed. "How dare you? Do you have any idea what you did last night? Marcus threatened to sue us. I had to put $5,000 on my credit card." "You have a credit card?" I asked calmly, stepping into the room. "I thought you were destitute." "Don't get smart with me," Judith snapped, marching toward me. "You embarrassed us. You abandoned your sister on her wedding day because of some petty jealousy over a photo." "It wasn't a photo, Judith," I said, my voice steady, projecting to the back of the room where the guests were watching with wide eyes. "It was an hour of photos, an hour where you explicitly told the photographer to exclude me. Just family, right?" "You're being dramatic," Lacey chimed in, rolling her eyes. "We were just stressed. You know how Mom gets. You ruined my reception, Lucy. I spent half the night crying in the bathroom because the DJ stopped playing." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "But since I'm not family, I didn't think it was my responsibility to pay for the family party." "Of course you're family," Judith hissed, lowering her voice as she realized the guests were listening intently. "Stop making a scene. We can discuss this later. Just go into the kitchen and help the caterers set up the second round of food. We're running low on quiche." She tried to herd me away, to push me back into the shadows, back into the servants' quarters. I planted my feet. No, I said loudly. Judith stopped. Excuse me. I'm not helping with the food, I'm not writing any more checks, and I'm not discussing this later. I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila envelope containing the notices I had drafted. I'm here to give you this, I said, handing it to Judith. She took it, frowning. She opened it, scanning the first page. Her face went pale, then red. What is this? She whispered. Notice to vacate. The house is being sold, I announced, addressing the room. The trust can no longer support the maintenance costs. Since the primary beneficiary, Judith, has failed to contribute to the upkeep for 8 years, the trustee, me, is liquidating the asset to recover losses. You can't do that, Lacey shrieked, jumping up. This is my childhood home. It's an asset, I corrected her. An asset that I have been paying for. And since I'm not family enough to be in a picture, I'm certainly not family enough to pay your mortgage. You're evicting your own mother, one of the aunts gasped. She's not my mother, I said coldly. She's my father's widow, and she has 30 days to leave. Judith crumpled the paper in her hand. You ungrateful little, I raised you. You lived off me, I corrected her. There's a difference. I will sue you, Judith screamed, losing all composure. The carefully curated mask of the elegant socialite slipped, revealing the desperate, grasping woman beneath. I will take you to court. This is my house. Your father wanted me here. My father wanted you taken care of, I said. He didn't want you to bleed his daughter dry. I have the receipts, Judith. Every bill, every repair, every loan you never paid back. It totals over $400,000. Do you want to go to court? Because I would love to show a judge where the money went. The room was deadly silent. The guests were staring at Judith, then at the expensive furniture, the catered food, the lavish decorations, suddenly seeing the price tag attached to everything. Get out, Judith hissed. Get out of my house. It's not your house, I said, turning to leave. It's mine, and I'll see you at the inspection on the 1st of the month. The fallout was immediate and nuclear. By Monday morning, my phone was a war zone. Judith had unleashed the flying monkeys. Aunts, cousins, and family friends were blowing up my phone, calling me heartless, cruel, and vindictive. How can you do this to a widow? Lace. Why is distraught? She can't stop crying. You need to apologize and fix this immediately. But amidst the hate mail, there was silence from 2 people, Judith and Lacey. They weren't calling. They were scrambling. I called my lawyer, a shark named Rebecca, whom I had worked with on commercial real estate deals. I sent her everything. The trust documents, the accounting records, the threats I had received. This is airtight, Rebecca said, reviewing the files. She has no leg to stand on. Clause 14B is clear. If you've been covering the costs personally, you have a claim against the trust. Selling the house is the only fiduciary remedy. She threatened to sue, I said. Let her, Rebecca laughed. With what money, you control the purse strings, Lucy. But Judith wasn't giving up. On Tuesday, I received a call from a family mediator, a woman from their church whom Judith had roped in. Lucy, dear, the woman said soothingly, Judith is very concerned about your mental state. She thinks you're having a breakdown. She wants to help you. Help me, I laughed. She wants to control me. She's willing to forgive you, the woman continued, ignoring me. She's willing to let you keep the house in the trust, provided you sign a document reaffirming her lifetime tenancy and, well, she mentioned a restitution payment for the emotional distress you caused at the brunch. Restitution? I asked, gripping the phone. She wants me to pay her for the privilege of letting her live in my house for free. She's very hurt, Lucy, and Lacey. Poor Lacey is worried about her honeymoon. They leave next week, you know. She's afraid you might do something rash. Tell Judith, I said, my voice icy, that the only thing I'm signing is the listing agreement with the realtor. And as for the honeymoon. I paused. I realized I hadn't canceled it yet. I had been saving it. Tell Lacey she should check her email. I hung up. I opened my laptop. I logged into the travel concierge. Cancel booking. Are you sure? This action is non-reversible. Yes. Booking canceled. I felt a surge of power, but the battle wasn't over. 2 days later, on Thursday, I was at a site visit for a client when my assistant called me. Lucy, there's a woman here to see you. She's screaming. It was Lacey. I drove back to the office. I found Lacey in the lobby, red-faced and hysterical. My receptionist looked terrified. You canceled it, Lacey shrieked when she saw me. You actually canceled it. We have flights on Monday. Todd took time off work. We bought clothes. I told you, I said, walking past her into my office. I'm not paying for people who pretend I don't exist. She followed me in, slamming the door. I'm sorry, she yelled. Okay, I'm sorry about the photos. It was Mom's idea. She said you looked old and tired and you'd ruin the aesthetic. I just went along with it. I'm sorry. I stopped. I turned to face her. She said I looked old and tired. Lacey faltered, realizing she had said too much. She just wanted it to be perfect. You know how she is. But Lucy, you can't punish me for that. I'm your sister. We're family. Are we? I asked. Because family doesn't treat people like ATMs. Family doesn't let their mother bully their sister for 20 years. I'll fix it, Lacey pleaded. I'll make Mom apologize. I'll post a picture of us on Instagram. I'll write a whole caption about how great you are. Just rebook the trip. Please. Todd will leave me if we don't go. He's already mad about the wedding drama. Todd will leave you because you lost a vacation? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Sounds like you married a winner. Maybe he and Judith can bond over their love of other people's money. You're a monster, Lacey spat. Mom was right. You've always been jealous of me because Dad loved me more, because I'm pretty and you're just the worker. The words hung in the air. That was it, the final confirmation. The mask was completely off. Get out of my office, I said quietly. Fix the trip. No. Then watch your back, Lacey sneered. Mom is meeting with a lawyer today, a real one. She says she found something in Dad's old papers. She says you stole the house. She's going to destroy you. She stormed out. I stood there shaking, not with fear but with rage. Stole the house. I called Rebecca immediately. They're escalating, I said. Judith is claiming fraud. Let them try, Rebecca said. But Lucy, if they're going down this road, we need to go nuclear. We need to expose them before they control the narrative. You said there was a post-wedding gala this weekend? A thank you dinner for the VIP guests. Yes, I said. Saturday night at the country club. Are you invited? I paid for the deposit. Then you're invited, Rebecca said. Go and take the files, take the proof. If they want to accuse you of theft in public, you show the public who the real thieves are. I look. Ed at the calendar, Saturday, the gala. It was time for one last party. The post-wedding gala was Judith's idea of a victory lap. It was intended to be an intimate, high-society dinner at the local country club, a way to thank the wealthy guests who had given the best gifts and to solidify Lacey's new status among the elite. Of course, the deposit for the private room and the prix-fixe menu had been charged to my card 3 months ago. I arrived precisely at 7:30 p.m. I wore a black dress, sharp, architectural, and expensive. I carried nothing but a small clutch and a slim leather portfolio. The maitre d' tried to stop me at the door. Ms. Lucy, I was told you wouldn't be attending. The seating chart has been finalized. I'm sure you can find a chair, Robert, I said, breezing past him. After all, I signed the contract for this event. The room fell silent as I entered. 30 people turned to look. Judith was mid-toast, holding a crystal flute. Lacey was seated next to Todd, looking sullen and puffy-eyed. Judith froze. Her knuckles went white around the glass. Lucy, she said, her voice tight, straining for polite confusion. What a surprise, we thought you were busy. I made time, I said, walking to the head of the table. I heard you've been telling people I stole the house. I thought I should come and clear the air." A murmur went through the room. Judith's face hardened. "This is not the place," she hissed. "Leave now." "Actually," I said, placing the leather portfolio on the table, right next to the floral centerpiece I had designed. "This is exactly the place. These are your friends, right? The people who matter. They should know the truth." "Security," Judith yelled, her facade cracking completely. "Get her out of here." "If you touch me," I said calmly to the waiter who took a step forward, "I will sue this club for allowing a host to be ejected from an event she paid for. Check the contract, Robert. The signature on the bottom is mine." Robert hesitated. He looked at Judith, then at me. He stepped back. I opened the portfolio. "For 10 years," I began, my voice clear and projecting to every corner of the room, "I have supported this family. I have paid the mortgage on the house Judith lives in. I have paid for Lacey's car, her clothes, her career. And I paid for this wedding. $80,000. "She's lying," Judith shrieked. "She's mentally unstable. She's jealous of Lacey." "Am I?" I pulled out a document. "This is the bank statement from the wedding account. Here are the transfers from my personal savings. $15,000 for the venue, $8,000 for the dress, $5,000 for the photographer who was told to keep me out of the photos." I held up the statement. People leaned in. Whispers erupted. "And this," I continued, pulling out another sheet, "is the trust accounting. Judith claims I stole the house. The truth is, Judith hasn't paid a penny in property taxes, insurance, or repairs since my father died. I have paid $420,000 to keep a roof over her head." "That's not true," Lacey shouted, standing up. "Daddy left us that money." "Daddy left the house in a trust," I corrected her. "A trust with no liquid assets because he knew Judith would spend it all. And she did. She spent the life insurance in 2 years. Since then, she has been spending my money." I looked directly at Todd, the groom. He looked horrified. "Todd," I said, "did you know the honeymoon was a gift from me? A $20,000 gift. Lacey told you she booked it, didn't she? She told you she was the one taking care of it." Todd looked at Lacey. "You said your trust fund paid for it." "There is no trust fund for Lacey," I said. "That money ran out when she was 21. I've been giving her an allowance, which, as of this week, is canceled." Lacey burst into tears. "You're ruining everything. You're a witch." "No," I said, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying for a decade. "I'm just the bank, and the bank is closed." I turned to Judith. She was shaking, her face a mask of pure hatred. "You have 26 days left to vacate the property," I said. "If you're not out, the sheriff will remove you. And if you try to sue me, I will countersue for the $500,000 in loans I can document. I will garnish your Social Security. I will take every designer bag in your closet." I closed the portfolio. "Enjoy the dinner," I said to the room. "I've already paid the bill. Consider it a severance package." I turned and walked out. Behind me, the room erupted into chaos. I heard Todd's voice raised in anger. I heard Judith screaming. I heard glass breaking. I didn't look back. I walked out the front door of the club, into the cool night air, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly alone. And it felt wonderful. The fallout was swift and absolute. Todd filed for an annulment 2 weeks later. It turned out that a lifestyle influencer with no income, no trust fund, and a mother on the verge of eviction wasn't quite the catch he thought she was. The revelation that Lacey had lied about her finances, and mine, was the deal-breaker. Judith tried to fight the eviction. She found a lawyer willing to take the case on contingency, claiming elder abuse. Rebecca, my lawyer, destroyed them in a single hearing. She presented the decade of bank transfers, the emails where Judith begged for money, and the receipts for the luxury vacations Judith took while claiming poverty. The judge not only upheld the eviction, but reprimanded Judith's lawyer for filing a frivolous suit. Judith moved into a small apartment in a neighboring town. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she tells anyone who will listen that her evil stepdaughter, stole her inheritance. Most people know the truth now, though. The social circle she valued so highly dropped her the moment the money and the house disappeared. Lacey blocked me on everything. I heard she moved in with a friend and is trying to pivot her brand to overcoming toxic family trauma. I haven't watched her videos. I don't need to. As for me, I sold the house. I couldn't keep it. Too many ghosts. I sold it to a nice young family who promised to keep the rose garden. I used the proceeds to buy a small cottage on the coast, a place with big windows and no guest room. I also changed my business model. I stopped taking residential clients who reminded me of Judith. I started focusing on commercial spaces, hotels, galleries, places where the contracts were clear and the boundaries were respected. 6 months after the wedding, I was walking along the beach near my new home. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "I miss you, I'm sorry. Mom is driving me crazy. Can we talk? L." I looked at the message. I watched the waves crash against the shore, eroding the sand, reshaping the coastline. Nature knows when to let go. It knows that sometimes destruction is necessary for creation. I didn't delete the text. I didn't block the number. I just put the phone back in my pocket and kept walking. I had a dinner reservation with friends, real friends, people who didn't care about my bank account, people who invited me into the photo because they wanted me there. I smiled, breathing in the salt air. The picture was finally complete, and for the first time, I was right in the center of it.